Recognize the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I graduated as a physiotherapist, I became a member of a union, and that's my first experience. And it was extremely comforting for me to know that there was a union protecting my rights. And then I moved back to Nova Scotia and discovered that those rights don't mean very much in this province, especially over the last 6 years. I don't want to have to speak to Bill 203 because I wish it didn't exist, but I am honored to have the opportunity to say something to this government. I was a member of the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union when the right to strike was legislated away from healthcare professionals. If we all recall correctly, even healthcare workers were like, well, you know, we are an essential service, and we did so with very little resistance. We are a profession that works overtime, evenings, weekends. We give up family time. We give up our own income sometimes to help our patients. And this government has taken advantage of our good nature. I watched in dismay a few years ago as the teachers of this province protested and went on strike for the first time in this province's history because this government once again decided to tell the workers of this province that they didn't respect their rights. And we saw what happened to this government when that happened, and I am here in part because of that government's decision to strip away the rights of the teachers of this province. At that time, thousands of people were communicating with this government. They came to law amendments until they were shut down. They were outside this legislature in the thousands, begging for this government to listen to their voices and to not take away the rights of workers in this province. But this government didn't listen. And why not? Because as the member from Pictou East said earlier, this government has one playbook and one playbook rule set only. Number one, go into negotiations, pick a number out of those negotiations and then misrepresent it to the public. Number two, pit Nova Scotians against each other and try to turn them on each other by insulting them. And then number three, legislate what they couldn't negotiate. I'm adding a step number 4, Mr. Speaker. They then demand that those very workers whose rights they violated, those very employees in this province that they disrespected, to work harder so that they can make the numbers that this government will then misrepresent in this House look better in time for an election. The Premier has made the claim in this House that this bill is to protect taxpayers' money. He didn't say that running a ferry bill of $20 million without sailing the ferry was protecting taxpayers' money. He didn't mention the fact that he's the highest paid Premier in this country, despite the fact that we have the highest child poverty rate, is protecting taxpayers' money. He's never offered to take a discount, and he parks for free. So how dare he insult the Crown prosecutors for a perk he happily takes? This is the same Nova Scotia Premier who says when we question any deal that this province enters into that we're then against something. The Minister of Education said we were against 4-year-olds. That's absurd. That's insulting. And frankly, it's an embarrassing argument that this government uses. If we ask any question of this government, then we must be against something. So the Minister of Education is trying to interrupt my thoughts, but this is really more important. If he had wanted to speak to this bill, he has the opportunity to stand up in this legislature and do so. And to that matter,
Order. I'll ask everybody to come to order. Two things. There'll be no back and forth. And second of all, the member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, you're not to address a member directly. You're to address your comments through the chair. Thank you. for Dartmouth, the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do recall the earlier Speaker of the House saying if there was any heckling, that member would be ejected.
I'm not the earlier speaker. I'm just keeping order. So warnings have been laid out. I will do my job, you do yours. The member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage. Thank you.
Well, I do recall hearing earlier today someone in the House saying that if anyone was going to heckle, that they would be ejected. Perhaps I'm wrong. We can go back to Hansard earlier.
This is not up for argument. The member will speak on the bill. The member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage. Thank you.
So, we'll talk about honouring workers. This is the same government who years ago cut funding 2 years in a row to long-term care facilities. Maybe that's an accounting issue. In fact, it's a labor issue. It showed tremendous disrespect to every long-term care worker in this province, because not only did you cut the budget, then recently this government sent a notice to the long-term care facilities and said, we've got a problem with backup in the emergency departments, so stop sending frail elderly to the emergency departments. And the only reason for doing that, Mr. Speaker, I will suggest, is to make the numbers of people being transferred to emergency look better in time for an upcoming election. This is the same government who says that it's an accounting issue, not a labor issue, who sent a letter to the emergency departments telling them to improve their offloading numbers. They didn't give them more long-term care beds. They didn't give them more acute care beds, which is the reason why we have such lousy offload times in the emergency departments. They frankly told them, would you hurry up and work faster and harder, but we're not going to give you the money to do so. There's only one reason for those letters going out to those people, is so that they can get the numbers to look better in time for an upcoming election. When it comes to labor versus an accounting and accountability issues, this government brought in collaborative health centres on the pretense that it would then reduce the number of people in this province without a family doctor. We went from 57 to 83 collaborative health centres in the previous 2-year period of time, except for the one promised to my constituency of Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, which that seems to have disappeared off the government's radar. What they did instead is have the numbers of people waiting for a physician on the Nova Scotia Health Authority Need a Family Doctor wait list in 2017-2018 is listed by this government as 45,555. And in the Nova Scotia Health Authority, by the numbers for 2018 to 2019, that's 51,802. So I've done the math. 6,247 more people looking for a family doctor now than in the past. So this government can say one thing and try to misrepresent the numbers in this House, but the facts speak for themselves. The Premier stood here today and said that he was justified in bringing in this bill. And to justify says that he is right, that he has the right to violate the bargaining rights of Crown attorneys because the payers can't afford it. So clearly he's saying that he has no confidence in the arbitrators of Nova Scotia. He does not, in fact, Mr. Speaker, respect any employee in this province who has a collective agreement. He doesn't respect those who work in long-term care facilities. He just tells them to work harder with less. He tells those who are waiting at home for home care. He, in fact, and I have the numbers if anybody wants them, he has spread out a similar amount of care over more people. So they're, in fact, getting 10 hours less of care per month than they did the year before. So what this Premier has done to the Crown prosecutors of this province is so similar, in my opinion, to what an abusive spouse does to someone. And I'll table the document,
Order.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. The member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage that is out of line to refer to the Premier and domestic violence. I ask you to retract that statement, and then we'll continue on. The member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
I will retract the statement, Mr.
Thank
Speaker.
you. Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
So, Mr. Speaker, the attempts to force a decision on someone, to insult them, to shame them publicly, to try to control their activities, to threaten to take away their freedom and to control their finances is a pattern of abuse that has been repeated over and over again by this government.
I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the spirit of the debate here, but a member referring to the government as abusing spouses and insinuating that that's the motive of the government, I think it's very clear that that's out of order. We respect the members opposite and their ability to speak on this bill, but I don't think it's acceptable that that's the kind of thing we're listening to here. There's Nova Scotians watching. I don't think they should be telling people that their government are abusers.
So I'll take it under advisement. I will second and last final warning on this for the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage going down this line. We've been all members, not just the one member, but I will say to all members in this House that we are to keep our conversations and our arguments and our debates on a professional level and to refer to anyone in this House or compare them to domestic violence. This is the this is the final warning for all members. The member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, nearly every hospital employee, long-term care facility worker, paramedic, Crown prosecutor, and everyone else employed in those sectors are understaffed and overworked. They deserve to be treated with respect. They deserve to have their collective bargaining rights respected. Because if their rights aren't respected, whose rights are going next? This bill is simply stripping away the rights of another set of Nova Scotians. This government stripped away the rights of the public accounts by reducing the number of public accounts meetings from 50 down to approximately 12 a year. This government offered collaborative health centres to doctors, but only if they could state in their applications that having a collaborative health centre would reduce the number of people on the wait list. There was no question in that collaborative health centre application how it would improve health. The focus on this government is to improve the way it looks to the public. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that this bill is a violation of the workers' rights, and I am sickened at how easily this has been brought through and rammed through without any warning or discussion with a majority of Nova Scotians. And I believe that this sets a dangerous precedent, sends a terrible message to anybody else in this province who might want to move here, who might want to set up a business here, who might want to negotiate any future contract with this government. I believe Nova Scotians deserve a government with a premier who has enough skills to negotiate and not legislate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.